how easy or difficult is it to help kids understand or care about religious verses? Have you ever tried to read them to a child? Has it been tricky? Tell me what you think. Well, my next two guests have taken 700 verses, I hope I'm right, from the Hindu text Gita, and made an adventure story out of it for kids. And my guests are Sonal Sachdev Patel and Jemma Kattan. Is that right? Kattan. That makes you sound like a superhero. Kattan.
That's all right.
Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's quite a challenge, isn't it? Making religious verse interesting for children.
Yes.
Isn't it? What made you want to do that?
Well,
Sonal.
Well, that's exactly it. You know, that many verses, that's really sort of heavy text. It's hard for children to access. It's hard for adults to access.
I mean, to be honest with you, a lot of religious verses are so deep, aren't they, that you have to read them. Well, I have to read them about 10 times to try and get my head around what is it that they're actually trying to say.
Yeah, and I think the first step is trying to understand it. And then the second step is trying to see how it's relatable to your own life. And that's what Jemma and I tried to do, is we wanted to draw out some of the deeper meanings of the Gita, and we use the interpretation of my guru Paramahansa Yogananda, who explained that the Gita story, which is this battle between these two families, is actually a metaphor for the battle that takes place within ourselves every day between our good tendencies and our bad tendencies. And because it was so important for us to make it relatable to children, we realised that there had to be this kind of compelling adventure story that children would be interested in rather than just understanding the Gita. And that was sort of where Jemma really got involved, because we've known each other since we were young. We've been great friends. But she's also a Women's Prize listed author. Ooh. And so I approached her to say, you know, I've got this idea, but how can we together work to make this relatable for children?
Yeah, because this is where you come in now.
That's right,
Jemma.
Yeah, so my instinct automatically was I wanted to be involved because Sonal and I are such great friends, and you know that would be fun. But I, as a storyteller, was really trying to work out, what is the story? Can we make this something that, in its own right, is something children will choose to read and access? Will it be engaging? And fortunately, when Sonal started talking to me about the Gita and we had those first conversations about it, and particularly when she started explaining this metaphor about this traditional verse that takes place on a battlefield really being the internal battle, and also the suggestion that meditation is perhaps a tool to approach that battle and to reconcile some of those good and bad tendencies, I kind of thought, actually, you know, we don't actually have to do any of that boring stuff of, you know, explaining and preaching and teaching, because that battle and that internal journey of meditation, that's a story. So that's when I suggested to Sonal that why don't we put this battle actually in the body of a modern, relatable child who's struggling with his emotions, like so many children, so many adults are. And then we can really go on this adventure of meditation up the spine through the chakras, which in meditation are these centers of energy in the body, but in our book become these magical realms full of all sorts of creatures and challenges to overcome. And that really allowed us to just start exploring some of those deeper messages of the Gita, but through this magical adventure world.
I'm going to ask a bit more about those sorts of things, but the actual Gita itself is quite a fantastic superhero type of story anyway, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely it is. And as I'm sure many of the listeners will know, the Gita is just the one chapter of the much greater Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. And the Gita is the point where Arjun, who's one of the great warriors of the Pandava family, is on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and he's hesitating. And he's saying, I don't want to fight my family and I don't know what to do. And then Lord Krishna comes, who's his teacher and his best friend and his charioteer, and he comes to give him advice to say, well, what should I do about this battle? And even though that story is so magical, the truths and the advice and the explanation that he gives him aren't just for the battle that's happening at that moment on Kurukshetra, because unless we can draw out those deeper messages and understand what's that got to do with what I'm going to go and do tomorrow? What's that got to do with the relationships that I have with my family and my friends? Then, that's when these amazing magical texts become outdated because people can't relate to them.
Mm-hmm. Is this sorry, Jemma, is this the first attempt at a children's version of the Gita, or there are other versions? I'm sure there must be other versions as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are other translations, but they haven't been done in a way that's bringing out sort of a fictional story.
Right, you're sort of like trying to tell the story in a different sort of way.
Right, and it's not a direct translation. So we haven't gone through verse by verse from the Sanskrit and translated, this is what it means in English. We've drawn out the messages that we think are the most relevant, with meditation and divine introspection being the key ones. And we've told them in a way that we think is much more relatable to the child. And we have, I think the Jemma will explain quite well, but we have these two stories going on at the same time. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So we have, in our book, we have this child in whose body the battle takes place. He's called Dev, and he's really struggling with his emotions because his father has recently died. And, fortunately, that's not something we all have to deal with at a young age, but everyone has to deal with exam stress or problems at home or problems with their friends. And so I think
challenges that
exactly,
you face.
Those are things that everyone is, struggles with at some point. And he is really consumed by grief and anger and lashing out until he meets this sprite-like creature called Sanjay, who represents divine introspection. And Sanjay explains to him about there being a war inside his body. And actually, Dev at the start, like a lot of children might be today, is quite cynical about this, doesn't believe him. But eventually he allows Sanjay to go inside his body and go on this magical journey. So we then operate on these two levels where we have this adventure happening inside the bodily kingdom with all these creatures and things. And then we have Dev on the outside dealing with those emotions. And we see how the two are intrinsically linked and how one affects the other and the journey that Dev himself goes through along the way.
I should say that if you're listening and you've got any thoughts on what Sonal and Jemma are talking about, you can call me and let me know what you think on 03459 440 445. You can text 81869, WhatsApp 07920 500 200, tweet at BBC Asian Network, or email thebigdebate@bbc.co.uk. Sonal, so you've had this idea. I've actually seen the book and I've seen the pictures and it looks fantastic. I haven't had a chance to read through it, I'm afraid, unfortunately. But what sort of reaction have you had? Have people sort of said, this is really good? Or have they said, no, you can't do it in this way because it's diluting the messages, the complex sort of messages and religious messages?
Yeah, I mean, actually, we've had the former, and I was surprised that we didn't have sort of any kind of debate around that, because it's already come out in India a couple of months ago, and probably in India that would be the place that we would potentially get that reaction. But I think that people are so, it's so important to get these messages to the next generation, and everybody is aware that we're sort of losing that my generation of parents don't necessarily have the knowledge that our parents did to be able to take all of these verses and distill them to our children in a way that makes sense to them. So things like this, books like this, are really valuable. And also, the Gita, the Battle of the Worlds, like I said, it's a bridge towards accessing the whole Gita. So we hope that children will read this, understand what the main messages are, and also that they'll want to pick up the Gita. How many kids do you know today that will say, before bedtime, Mummy, read me the Gita, read me the Ramayana, read me the Bible, read me the Quran? Not that many. Even my children were asking me to read them, other fantastic authors, but not necessarily the Gita. And we want them to feel like this is helpful to me. This is going to help me to live a much happier, peaceful life. And I think that our children aren't necessarily given those tools. They're given fantastic academic tools, but we can see it in the statistics that we see today in our mental health. I think young minds say that 1 in 10 children suffer from mental health. So what do we need to arm our children with? And many of the tools that we need are in our religious texts. So how do we give those to them in a way that they can relate to and understand?
What about when you were young and or younger, and how did your parents sort of talk to you about it?
Well, I think I was really fortunate because my parents came to this country from East Africa, and my mum read the Gita every day from the day that she was 13.
Wow.
But funnily enough, I used to watch her reading the Gita, but I never read it till I was pregnant with my first daughter. So I watched it for 20 years, but never actually kind of interacted. And also, I was introduced to the teachings of an Indian saint when I was only 11. So I started practicing meditation from quite young. So I think my generation did get that because a lot of our parents were doing their prayers, lighting diva, reading the Gita, reading the Ramayana, the Mahabharata. But I think we're not doing that. So then, therefore, it's hard for us to take to our children because we don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of our culture because we've been born and brought up in this country.
Jemma, you said that you got involved in this project, if I could call it that, because you're old pals with Sonal and all of that. But what about, presumably it's very hard to separate working on a project like this without sort of having some sort of interest in those Hindu verses and the Hindu religion. Is it or isn't it?
Well, I actually, all of the books I've written have been heavily steeped in research, and this one too. And I always love that element of a piece of writing. I love immersing myself in it. And it was wonderful to learn about all the myriad tales and beliefs associated with this one part of, as you said, what's really a much vaster text. And obviously that is rooted in Hinduism and Eastern spirituality. But for me, the actual kind of real attraction and, the drawing force of it was nothing to do with Hinduism itself, but it was actually what felt like much more of a universal message within the story. And that's what I was so excited about trying to bring out as well. In that, I think so many of our world religions too often get distorted or politicized and work in a way where they exclude and divide. And what we sometimes forget is what we're trying to do and say and teach in so many of these religions is how to be a good person, how to choose to act well. And that element of introspection is one of the key messages in the Gita. It's in the internal battle. It's between our good tendencies and our bad. There's a line we took directly from the original Gita that appears in our story as well, where the question is asked, what did they? And that is in the context of what happened on the battlefield today. Who won the battle for the soul? Did we act well? And sometimes I think we become so consumed with kind of the legalism of our own religion and the narrow-mindedness of that we forget that fundamental essence at the heart of, are we acting well? Are we being good people? So that was a message that felt really universal and really natural to me to tell, kind of regardless of religious background.
Sonal, I don't want to put you on the spot, and but I was sort of part of me sort of thinking, actually, how do you feel about maybe reading out a few lines just to give our listeners a bit of an idea? If you want to find something, because I know I've just sprung this on you, I'll ask Jemma another question while you're looking for a couple of lines, just to give us, so that I understand what is it that's different about the way you're doing it. So Jemma, what's your hope for this? I know that what your sort of like almost like spiritual hopes are, but just in terms of sales and who it gets to, what are you hoping on that level?
I guess really, obviously you want the book to do as well as it can, but the thing that really drew us to writing it and what we hope we'll see in the audience is, I guess there's two main messages. One is this universal message of, bringing peoples together and looking for those deeper levels of introspection. But also, as Sonal alluded to earlier, this idea about mental health, which is obviously a very hot topic at the moment, but really arming our children with the tools to deal with, emotionally difficult times. And that's something I think the younger we start, the better we'll do with it. And even as somebody, there's a lot of scientific research that says through meditation, you can actually see the grey matter of the brain changing. It leads to better immunity, better cognitive function, and really importantly, decreased levels of stress, anxiety.
Okay, I need to start meditating.
And, even as someone who doesn't meditate, you kind of just know you need a bit of calm and stillness in your life to process anything. So if we could just encourage, a pause and a moment of introspection, then that could be quite a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing...
Maybe I need a lot of meditation in that case.
It's also, I think, really valuable for children to start, because as adults, we've got into a lot of habits with not being able to focus and concentrate. And people sometimes think meditation is just sitting there and doing nothing, but it actually takes a lot of work. And just like you train a body part, you're training the mind. Jemma and I are doing a UK schools tour, and we've been into some schools, and I've been utterly amazed at how well children sit and meditate.
I was going to say that I've read a few stories of children meditating where they basically get them to sort of like just sit on the floor, close their eyes, sit cross-legged and just sort of meditate. And it's incredible. They say, the change in behaviour and all, some of the sort of challenges that the kids and the schools and the teachers face sort of like fall away or drop because of the meditation.
What I think is really wonderful about a lot of aspects of Hinduism is that there are many things like meditation and even the foods that were considered sort of just limited to that religion, but are now becoming mainstream, and we're seeing the likes of Harvard University showing, the scientific evidence of what these things actually do.
You're going to read a little bit out, aren't you?
Okay, so this part that I'm going to read is from the part of the book where this sprite-like being, Sanjay, enters the base of the spine. And instead of preaching about the laws of karma and...
That sounds horrible. Sorry, I don't mean to...
The spine,
that sounds horrible. I'm not sure.
Well, it's not horrible in the book, but you'll have to read it to see. So it's chapter 3, and it's the darkest realm. And so it's a little bit dark, but it does lead on into much more beautiful chapters. But so this one goes, the path opened onto a great dusty plain. You may have seen this place before in a nightmare, in your darkest of dreams. You may have felt this place deep inside you when you are at your most desolate and wretched. You may have glimpsed it when you've closed fearful eyes, so you might know already the things that awaited Sanjay, the worst of sights, the worst of people. Sanjay trod carefully. His large eyes gazed in horror, but right from the start, his nose had the worst of it. The stench was overwhelming, a foul concoction of rotted waste, decaying bodies, the decomposition of life. And
that makes me want to read it, but I'm an adult. But I'm sure kids would love all the decomposing sort of element and all of that.
Yeah, it's been actually quite interesting in that some of the people who have already read it and have given us some feedback, a lot of the parents have been commenting saying, actually, this is quite a good way into this text for them as well, and they're really enjoying reading it as an adult. It's something that we hope that it can hopefully be enjoyed on different levels. So maybe a younger child will just appreciate it in terms of an adventure story, but perhaps slightly older children or through conversation with parents, you can start talking about some of those messages underneath and some of the underlying ideas from the original Gita.
We've run out of time, but I just wanted to say that we had a caller, Gurmel Kaur, who called in and said, congratulations to you guys on the book. It says the concept is amazing. And she wanted to know what the name of the book is. I know what the name of it is, but why don't you tell us what it is and when it's coming out and where people can get it?
It's called Gita Battle of the Worlds.
And it's coming out on Thursday, but is available for pre-order on Amazon now.
Lovely. I should have actually done a drum roll, shouldn't I, before? Yeah, it's coming out on Thursday. Thank you very much for that. It sounds like a fantastic project. I really hope it goes well.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.